Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Angel and today we're doing some more Halloween DIYs. For this project, I ended up grabbing this long rectangular frame from my thrift store. It didn't have a backing, so I just ended up cutting out a piece of cardboard from one of my packages and fit it to the frame. And then I'm going to paint this with 2 coats of my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Then I went into Photoshop and created this little sign from the Raven, and this is also available on my blog for you. If you are interested, I will leave the link in the description box below. But once I had this created, then I'm taking just a piece of Dollar Tree's packing paper, which I was able to cut it in the length that I needed, and I copied this from my computer, just tracing over it onto this paper. Then as you can see, I'm taking some of my carbon paper, which I got from Amazon, and I'm going to tape it down to that piece that I'm using as the backing. Then I just taped my sign down onto the carbon paper so it's not moving around as I'm doing this. Then just using my little tool that also came with my carbon paper, I'm just going to trace over this entire thing, and then once I pulled that off, I was able to just use my paint marker and go over all those words, and also I traced around my Raven. Now initially I didn't want to waste my paint marker coloring in the little spaces that needed to be darkened on the Raven piece, but they were so tiny that I wasn't able to really use a paintbrush for this, so I did end up having to color this in with my paint marker. Now as for the frame itself, I was a little bit torn whether I should paint this frame or not, but I do like a good dark wood frame, so what I ended up deciding was just to use these little bronze corner pieces instead. For this project, I grabbed these little Target dollar spot houses, actually from my thrift store, in this little bag, and I just picked out 4 of them that I liked, and for the first 2, I'm going to paint those with some black chalk paint, and for the second 2, I'm going to use my white chalk paint. Then to turn these into little spooky houses, I'm actually going to be using a combination of Dollar Tree's rub-on transfers and some of my stamps that I got from Amazon. Actually, I'm just going to be using this one stamp, which is a spider web, and then for the rest of them, I just ended up using Dollar Tree rub-on transfers. I did the spider webs with some spiders, some ghosts, and also these little black crows on some of them. And then again, for this one, I just did a different kind of ghost. And once I had them all finished, I took them outside and gave them 2 coats of my Aleene's acrylic sealer. For this project, I'm grabbing a large ball of my air dry clay, and I am just going to knead that in my hands a little bit, warm it up, and get it ready to shape. Then I'm going to just start rolling this around on one of Dollar Tree's little cutting mats, and I'm going to start shaping this into a ghost shape. Once I had it all rolled out and to the size that I wanted, then I'm just going to kind of pinch around where his neck would be to make an indentation between his head and his neck. And then I'm also going to shape the very tip top where it's a little thinner and kind of just lean that over to the side. And when I was happy with it, this is what the shape ended up looking like. Now I want this ghost to be able to hold something, so I'm gonna make him a couple little arms just using some more of that air dry clay. I grabbed 2 small pieces and I'm gonna start rolling those out and sizing them up. At first they were a little too big, so I just pinched off some of the clay and just kept working with it until I was happy with both of the arms. Now, instead of gluing his arms to him, I'm actually going to be doing some clay slipping on this ghost. And what I did was just rough up the little spot where I'm going to put his arm. And then I'm just using a paintbrush and some water to attach his arm to his body. And then I'm going to go back in with a little more water, get that nice and wet. And then I'm going to take a really thin, tiny piece of clay and I dipped it into the water. And then I'm just going to use my finger with some water on it and I'm going to rub that in to blend his arm into his body. So you'll see I just keep dipping my finger in the water and rubbing it over his arm right where his shoulder would be to blend both of those pieces of clay together so it looks like this is just one single piece. And using this method, you won't have to worry that his arm is going to fall off or anything like that because wet clay is actually kind of like a glue to itself, so this is going to work nicely just to make this piece look like it was just made in one piece. Once I was finished with the first arm, then I just went to the other side and I did the exact same process. Again, just scraping up his body a little bit, adding some water, then attaching his arm, and again, taking some small thin pieces of clay, dipping those in the water, then blending it all in with my finger. And if you're not able to get it all completely smooth, don't worry about it because once this is completely dry, you can sand this down a little bit to blend it even further. Now, like I said, I wanted this ghost to be holding something, and that something is a pumpkin. So I'm actually using this little pumpkin mold that I got from Amazon, and it's actually 2 pieces that go together, but I'm only going to be using the one piece to make half of the pumpkin. Now, I'm not going to attach this to my ghost just yet because I want my ghost to completely dry, and then here it is the next day. It is pretty much completely dry, and like I said before, I did sand this down a little bit, then just wipe it off with a paper towel. And now I'm going in with some of my white chalk paint first, and then for the pumpkin, I mixed up some burnt orange paint, and I'm going to do 2 coats on there, and I also painted the stem with some brown paint before attaching this to the front of my ghost, just using some gel super glue. And finally, all I had to do was use my little paint marker here to make his little eyes and his mouth. For this final project, I really wanted to make a ghost planner. I saw one on Pinterest last year and I just decided this year I was going to make one. So I grabbed this little ceramic pot that I already had. You can use any planter or even a plastic container, whatever you have on hand. So I'm actually going to be doing a paper mache ghost for this. So here I have some water mixed with a tiny bit of flour, some regular white school glue, and I added a tablespoon of salt to keep this from molding. Now I didn't really measure anything I put in here, but you're going to want this to be a super thin pancake batter consistency. And you don't need a ton of flour for this. I think I put maybe a tablespoon or two in here. But once you get it all in, just keep mixing it up until you get that consistency. For the paper I'm using for this, you could definitely use recycle paper, but I didn't have enough laying around, so I ended up using some Dollar Tree packing paper and just cut that down into strips. Now here you're also going to see me rolling some of those longer pieces, and I'm actually using these to make the indentions of the ghost sheet. I don't know what they're called, but you'll see in just a little bit. So once I get the paper rolled down, then I'm dipping it down into my mixture and I'm kind of pinching the top of it, and then I'm going to start attaching these to my ceramic planter. Now as you're doing this, don't worry if these do not totally stick to the planter. You just want to get them in place and you want them to be very moistened with that glue mixture. So you'll see I just keep working my way around the planter, adding more of those, and then I'm going to take some of those little sheets that I had cut down, dip those down into my mixture, and you can see I'm actually taking my fingers and rubbing off a lot of the excess, and then I'm going to put these over top of those rolled up pieces that I made and push them tight to attach them to the planter. So essentially I'm just taking those strips, dipping them, wringing them out a little bit with my fingers, and then covering up these rolled up pieces to encase them tight to the planter. You can also see that at the top I'm actually pushing these over the edge of the planter to the inside. And at this stage, you don't need to worry about if it's pretty or not. You just want to cover everything. So once I had that first side done, this is what it ended up looking like. You can see it is not perfect, but that's okay. I moved on to the other side and I just repeated the same process. Once I was finished, I actually sat this outside in the sun for a few hours to dry, which actually worked really wonderfully because this was, like I said, completely dry just after a few hours. So then I was able to move on to the second layer, and I just repeated that whole process over again of covering this entire thing with another layer of those paper strips in my glue mixture. Then again, I sat this outside in the sunlight to dry. Now, as you may have noticed when I did the second layer, the bottom was very uneven. So once this was dry from the second layer, I brought it back in and I trimmed off that bottom. And then I'm taking some smaller strips and folding those over the bottom to make it nice and neat, just dipping those smaller pieces into the glue mixture and putting them over the bottom parts of this. Then it was time for the final layer of this, and this is what's going to make it look a lot neater and less noticeable where you have the paper strips. I'm actually just taking some pieces of paper towel, cutting that down into strips, dipping it down into my mixture, and then for this third and final layer, I'm just covering this entire thing with those paper towel strips. And again, just like before, I actually let this dry in the sun, this time for 2 days, just to make sure everything was really nice and dry before I went in with a baking soda and white chalk paint mixture, and I went over this entire thing with 2 coats of that mixture. Once that was dry, then I just wanted to go in and add a little variation of color, kind of like the inspiration. So I'm just taking this tan paint and I have a wet paintbrush. I'm kind of just going over certain spots and then I'm rubbing it in with my finger. And then I also took a little bit of black paint on my brush and I'm kind of, again, just tapping that in random spaces, just like the inspiration. Now for the eyes, you can just hand draw these if you wanted to, but since this is kind of an awkward shape and I'm not that great at drawing eyes, I'm actually just using this oval stencil that I got from Amazon, and I do end up changing it to the thinner oval eyes. But once I have those traced on there, then I'm just using some black chalk paint to fill those all in. And that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these Halloween DIYs. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.